The champagne flute felt like a weapon in Lena's hand. She held it with a tight, controlled grip, the delicate stem cold against her skin. Around her, the rooftop party pulsed with the low thrum of expensive conversations and muted house music. Below, the city sprawled out, a glittering carpet of indifferent lights. She was a ghost here, a necessary part of the scenery. As a server for one of the city's most exclusive catering companies, she was paid to be invisible, to refill glasses and clear plates with silent efficiency. But tonight she hated it. Her eyes found him across the crowded terrace. Marcus Thorne. He was exactly her type, or rather, the type she aspired to. Old money, easy smile, a casual confidence that came from never having been told no. He was laughing with a blonde whose dress probably cost more than Lena's entire semester of tuition. She had been nursing a crush on him for months, ever since he'd spoken to her at an event, asking a question about the wine with a genuine curiosity that had snagged on her heart. Since then, nothing. She was just the server again. Desperation was an ugly, bitter taste in her mouth. She needed to break through the wall of his perception. She needed to be seen as someone who belonged in his world, not someone who served it. And in his world, status was everything. Who you were with mattered. That was the thought that sparked the idea, a reckless, foolish flame in the back of her mind. She pulled out her phone, shielding the screen with her body. She'd heard whispers about a service, discreet, exclusive, and ridiculously expensive. A website that promised the perfect companion for any occasion, an actor to play a part. The tagline was simple: unforgettable impressions. She needed more than impressive. She needed a statement. For the upcoming Sterling Gala, the biggest event of a season, she wouldn't be a server. She'd be a guest. And she wouldn't be alone. Scrolling through the profiles was like flipping through a catalog of impossible men. But none of them felt right. They were too polished, too perfect. She needed an edge. She needed someone who would make Marcus Thorne look twice, someone who radiated a power that money couldn't buy. Under the special requests section, she typed a single, fateful sentence: I need someone who commands a room without saying a word. She hit submit, the fee draining her savings account in a single, painful transaction. The night of the Sterling Gala arrived with a nervous tremor in her hands. She stood outside the Grand Hotel, the cool night air prickling her bare shoulders. Her dress was a rental, a column of dark silk that made her feel like an imposter. The instructions had been clear: be at the entrance at 8 o'clock. He would find her. At precisely 8, a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a limousine or a luxury sedan. It was a black vehicle, so dark it seemed to drink the light around it, its lines sharp and predatory. The valet froze, his professional smile faltering. A man emerged from the back seat. Lena's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't what she had expected. The website had promised handsome, but this man was something else entirely. He was Japanese, with sharp, intelligent features carved from stone. His suit was a masterpiece of black wool, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. But it was the details that sent a chill down her spine. The severe cut of his dark hair, the absolute, unnerving stillness of his posture. And as he adjusted his cuff, she saw it. The dense, swirling lines of a traditional tattoo, a dragon's tail disappearing under the pristine white fabric of his shirt.
Ink.
Not the trendy kind, but the kind that meant something.
Something permanent.
He moved toward her, his steps silent and deliberate. The chaotic energy of the gala entrance seemed to part for him. He stopped a foot away, his dark eyes sweeping over her once, an assessment so quick and total it left her feeling exposed. "Lena," he said. His voice was low, a quiet rumble that cut through the noise. It wasn't a question. She could only nod, her own name feeling foreign on his tongue. "I am Kaido," he stated. Nothing more. He offered his arm. Taking it was like touching marble. His arm was solid, unyielding beneath the fine wool. As he led her up the grand staircase, a strange quiet fell over the people they passed. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. She felt their eyes on her, on him, on them together. She had wanted to make a statement. She was beginning to realize she had hired a thunderclap. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of glittering jewels and forced smiles. And then she saw Marcus. He was standing near the bar, and for the first time all night, he wasn't smiling. His eyes were fixed on them, on Kaido's hand resting possessively on the small of her back. A flicker of triumph went through Lena, but it was quickly extinguished by a new, colder feeling.
Fear.
Kaido guided her to a secluded table. He moved like the room owed him space. He hadn't said more than 5 words, yet he owned the entire floor. "Is that him?" Kaido's voice was soft, right by her ear. She looked up, startled. "What?" His gaze was fixed on Marcus. "The reason you required my services." She felt a hot flush of embarrassment. "It's complicated." "No," he said, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "It is simple. You wish to be seen. You are seen now." The truth of his words was chilling. Everyone was watching them. But it wasn't just the socialites and the city's elite. Lena noticed other men in dark suits who stood near the exits, their shoulders too broad, their eyes too sharp. They weren't looking at the spectacle. They were watching Kaido. And they were watching her. That was when she made the mistake of looking up as another man approached their table. He was older, with a cruel slash of a mouth and eyes like chips of ice. He stopped, his gaze flicking from Kaido to Lena, a flicker of something ugly and knowing in his expression. "Ishikawa," the man said, his voice a low growl. "I did not expect to see you slumming it with the civilians." Kaido didn't stand. He simply inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement that held no respect. "Sato, your presence pollutes the air." The air between them turned frigid. Sato's eyes lingered on Lena, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made her skin crawl. "You've found a new pet. A pretty 1-inch. Before she could process the insult, Kaido's hand tightened on her back, a silent, unmistakable warning. "She is with me," he said, the words as final as a death sentence.
Leave. Now.
Sato's smile was a baring of teeth. He gave a slight, mocking bow and retreated into the crowd. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but the entire dynamic of the room had shifted. The illusion of a fake date, of a simple game to get a crush's attention, shattered into a million pieces. This wasn't a game. Kaido wasn't an actor. He was real, and his world was bleeding into hers with terrifying speed. She was no longer just Lena. She was the woman with Kaido Ishikawa. And in this world, that was the most dangerous thing she could be. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of tension. Kaido said little, but his presence was a constant, heavy weight beside her. When it was time to leave, he led her out not to a waiting taxi, but back to the black car that seemed to absorb the night. "My address is," she began, but he cut her off. "You will not be going home tonight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, his men following in a second vehicle that appeared out of nowhere. "What are you talking about?" "Our arrangement is over," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Our arrangement changed the moment Sato saw you," he replied, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights. "He marked you. In his eyes, you are now a vulnerability. My vulnerability. You are no longer safe alone." The car sped through the city, leaving her familiar world behind. They arrived at a residential skyscraper that scraped the clouds, its entrance guarded by men in sharp suits. The elevator ascended in silence, opening directly into a penthouse that was more fortress than home. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of Tokyo, a city that now felt alien and threatening. The space was minimalist, decorated in shades of black, gray, and white, with sharp lines and an air of cold, sterile control. It was his space. It was her cage. For days, she was a prisoner in paradise. He gave her a room with its own stunning view, a closet filled with clothes in her size that had appeared as if by magic, and the illusion of freedom within the penthouse's walls. But she was never alone. His men were ghosts in the hallways, their presence a constant reminder of her situation. Kaido himself was a phantom. He would be there for hours, working silently in his office, the door left slightly ajar. Then he would be gone, disappearing for a day at a time without a word. One afternoon, a name caught her ear. He was on the phone, his voice a low, lethal cadence of Japanese. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of a king giving orders. Then, she heard it, a single word, spoken in English, that made his voice crack with something that sounded like pain. Akemi. The call ended abruptly. A heavy silence filled the apartment. Later that evening, he found her in the living area, staring out at the city. She had been tracing the patterns of the traffic, trying to remember what her own life felt like. He stood beside her, his reflection a dark shape against the glass. "You are restless," he observed. "I'm a prisoner," she countered, her voice sharper than she intended. His expression didn't change. "You are protected. There's a difference." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its usual command. "There was a woman, Akemi. She was an associate. Clever. Fearless. My enemies saw her as a way to get to me. I was arrogant. I thought I could protect her without disrupting her life. I was wrong." He turned from the window, his eyes dark with a shame so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "They took her to send me a message. I do not make the same mistake twice." That was the moment she understood. This wasn't about her. It was about him, about the ghost of a woman he had failed. She was a penance, a duty. That knowledge should have made her feel used, but instead, it planted a strange, unwelcome seed of empathy. She saw the wound he carried, the single crack in his armor of absolute control. Her chance came a week later. There was a commotion downstairs, a breach in security. For a few frantic minutes, the guards were distracted. His attention was elsewhere. The service elevator was unguarded. She could walk out, disappear into the city, take her chances. Her heart pounded in her chest.
Run.
The single word screamed in her mind. She moved toward the door, her hand outstretched. But then she glanced out the window. Down on the street, she saw a parked car that didn't belong. Two men inside watching the building.
Sato's men.
They were waiting. Running wouldn't be freedom. It would be a death sentence. And in that instant, she realized Kaido was right. Her old life was gone. She made a choice. She walked not to the elevator, but to his office. He was standing over a blueprint of the building, his face a mask of cold fury. "The western entrance," she said, her voice steady. "The security camera has a blind spot. 47 seconds, every 3 minutes. It's a software glitch in the timing loop." He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. He had thought her a liability, a civilian caught in the crossfire. He had not expected this. He walked to his monitor, typed a few commands, and watched the feed. He saw the glitch. He saw the vulnerability she had spotted. He looked at her then, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a problem to be managed. He was looking at an asset. He stood in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell the faint, clean scent of cedar and smoke that clung to him. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice a low whisper. "I watch," she said simply. "I listen. I survive." The silence that followed was not empty. It was charged with a new, dangerous current. He was a predator, and she was his captive, but the lines were blurring into something far more complicated. She had chosen to stay, telling herself it was about survival. But as he stood there, his presence an undeniable force, she knew it was already more than that. Her old life tried to pull her back. A text message from Marcus Thorne buzzed on the new, untraceable phone Kaido had given her. "Lena, where have you been? I saw you at the gala."
Who was that guy?
"I've been worried. We should talk." The words were a ghost from a world she no longer inhabited. The crush she had nurtured for months now seemed laughably naive. She showed the message to Kaido. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face as he read the name. "Thorne," he said, the name a strange weight in his mouth. "His family's shipping company is a vessel. They move merchandise for Sato, whether they know it or not." Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Marcus wasn't just a rich kid. He was a pawn in a much larger game. And now, so was she. The attack came, without warning. They were in the car, moving through the neon-drenched streets of Shinjuku, when a black sedan slammed into their side. The world became a violent kaleidoscope of screeching metal and shattering glass. Kaido's arm shot out, bracing her against the impact, his body a shield over hers. Another car blocked them from the front. Men in dark suits poured out, guns raised. Kaido moved with a lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. He pushed her down, his voice a sharp command in her ear. Stay down. He produced a weapon from inside his jacket, as if it were an extension of his own hand. The next few seconds were a symphony of controlled violence. Muzzle flashes lit the car's interior. The sound was deafening. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. For one heart-stopping moment, there was a grunt of pain from him, and a hot, wet spray hit her cheek. She thought he was hit. A primal fear, cold and absolute, seized her. It wasn't for a stranger. It was for him. Then it was over. Silence descended, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. Kaido was breathing heavily beside her, the gun still steady in his hand. He was untouched. The blood on her face was not his. The incident changed something between them. The violence had forged a new, unspoken intimacy. Back in the penthouse, the adrenaline still singing in her veins, he laid out the problem. Sato was making a major move, using the Thorn family's network to bring in a huge shipment. To stop it, Kaido needed to know the route, the time, the location. Information only someone with access to Thorn Shipping's internal servers could get. Information Marcus could get. He wants to see you, Kaido said, his voice flat. It was not a question. It was a command disguised as an observation. You want me to use him, Lena stated, the reality of it settling like a stone in her stomach. I want you to survive, he corrected her, but they both knew it was the same thing. She met Marcus at a quiet cafe, a place so far removed from Kaido's world it felt like a different planet. He was charming, apologetic, and completely captivated by her. The attention she had once craved now felt like a tool she had to wield. Playing the part of the interested, slightly mysterious woman was sickeningly easy. She lied, smiling as she steered the conversation, planting the seeds, asking the innocent questions that would lead him to reveal what she needed. She felt a part of herself she didn't recognize taking over, a colder, more calculating version. When she left, she had the information Kaido needed, and she had a piece of her soul missing. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. That night, the tension in the penthouse was unbearable. She gave him the details and he listened, his expression unreadable. When she was done, he just looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. You move through this world like you were born to it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It should frighten me. She met his gaze, the lie she'd been telling herself finally dissolving. I told myself I was staying to survive, she confessed, the words tasting like ash. I was lying. He took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. He raised a hand, his fingers gently brushing the side of her face where his man's blood had splattered hours before. The touch was electric, a brand against her skin. It wasn't a promise of safety or of love.
It was a claim.
The response from Sato was swift and personal. Kaido's plan worked. The shipment was intercepted, a crippling blow to Sato's operation. But Sato didn't retaliate against Kaido's business. He retaliated against her. A package arrived at the penthouse. Inside was a single photograph. It was of the front door to her old apartment, the one she hadn't seen in weeks. Scrawled across it in red ink was a single word: soon. The message was clear. They knew who she was. They knew where she was from. She was no longer a shield or a pawn. She was the target. The danger was no longer his. It was theirs. The photograph was a declaration of war. Sato wasn't just coming for Kaido's empire anymore. He was coming for her. The threat stripped away the last of Lena's illusions. She wasn't a victim caught in the crossfire. She was a player in the game, whether she'd chosen to be or not. He thinks you are my weakness, Kaido said, his voice a low, dangerous hum as he stared at the photograph. "He will use you as bait. Then let him," Lena said, her own voice surprising her with its steadiness. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but something else had taken root beside it: resolve. She would not be the helpless woman in the tower. She would not be another Akemi. They spent the next day planning, not as boss and captive, but as partners. Her mind, sharp and analytical, saw angles he was too close to notice. She knew how Sato would think, how he would view her, as a terrified civilian, easy to manipulate. She proposed a plan to use that assumption against him. She would be the bait, but on her own terms. The trap was set at a neutral location, a high-end art gallery that Sato's organization used for money laundering. Lena was to arrive alone, a signal that she was running, seeking a deal to escape Kaido's world. Every detail was meticulously planned, from her frantic, tearful phone call to one of Sato's known associates, to the slight tremor in her hands she would have to fake. Walking into that gallery was the hardest thing she had ever done. The air was sterile, smelling of polish and old money. Sato was waiting for her in a private viewing room, surrounded by priceless art and two of his most formidable enforcers. He smiled when he saw her, a predator's welcome. "I knew you were an intelligent woman," Sato said, gesturing to a chair. "Ishikawa is a cage. I can offer you a flight out of it." Lena played her part. She spoke of fear, of wanting her old life back. All the while, her eyes scanned the room, noting exits, counting seconds, her mind a race car engine of pure adrenaline. She had one job: keep him talking until Kaido's men were in position. And she had to plant the small listening device, disguised as a cufflink, that she palmed in her hand. She leaned forward, feigning desperation. "What do you want from me?" "Information," Sato said, his eyes gleaming. "Everything you know about Ishikawa's operations. His weaknesses." He leaned closer. "Where does he keep his most important records?" This was her moment. With a trembling hand, she reached for a glass of water on the table between them, deliberately knocking it over. As Sato and his men flinched back from the spill, her other hand moved, quick as a snake, dropping the cufflink into the inner pocket of his suit jacket hanging on the back of his chair. It was a desperate, impossible move. But Sato was faster than she expected. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, his grip like iron. "Clumsy," he hissed, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. His gaze dropped to his jacket. The world slowed down. She had failed. Then, the gallery's lights went out. The room was plunged into absolute darkness and chaos. In the same instant, the doors burst open. The sounds were brutal and efficient, the silent shots of Kaido's men, the grunts of pain from Sato's guards. A hand grabbed her arm, pulling her down and away from the fight. It was Kaido. He had been there the whole time, hidden, waiting. When the emergency lights flickered on moments later, Sato was on the ground, disarmed and held by two of Kaido's soldiers. The fight was over before it had truly begun. Surgical, deliberate, lethal. In the silent aftermath, surrounded by the wreckage of the confrontation, Kaido walked over to her. He ignored everyone else in the room. He gently took her hand, turning it over, checking for injury. His touch was steady, grounding. He looked at her, his eyes dark and intense. He touched a thin, silvery scar on the back of his own hand, a memento from some past battle. "In my world, every scar is a debt paid or a lesson learned," he said, his voice low and for her alone. "This what you did tonight, it is not a debt. It is a bond." He didn't need to say more. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was an acknowledgement of truth. She was no longer a liability he had to protect. She was a part of him now, woven into the code of honor and violence that defined his existence. The price for this new reality was absolute. Her old life, her friends, her ambitions of graduating and fitting into Marcus Thorne's world, they were all gone, ashes of a person she used to be. Marcus was a footnote in a story that had become an epic, a casualty of a war he never knew existed. Later that night, she stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The city lights of Tokyo spread out before her, A vast, glittering kingdom. It was no longer a cage. It was a territory. Her territory. Kaido came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, reassuring wall at her back. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat of him, a silent promise. He didn't ask if she was staying. The question was unnecessary. They both knew the answer. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass. A woman stared back, her eyes holding a depth and a stillness that hadn't been there before. She didn't recognize her completely, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what she saw. She had made a desperate choice to get a man's attention, and in doing so, had found a world where she commanded it. She had wanted to be seen. Now, she was unforgettable. She turned her head slightly, her reflection meeting his in the glass, and a quiet, terrifying certainty settled in her soul. She was exactly where she was supposed to be,